Hello, and welcome to this week's Movie Math, where DC continues to find itself in the middle of a huge storm. This time, arguments over whether or not the opening weekend for Black Adam is good or bad. An argument, a contentious debate that didn't just start today when the final numbers came in. Well, I guess the final numbers will come in tomorrow, but the estimates that Hollywood puts out on Sunday are like 99% correct. But, this debate started as soon as, even before the movie hit theaters. People were, and I see a number of people who were insisting this movie was going to open with a 7 in front of it. It's not that far from having a 7 in front of it, but it doesn't have a 7 in front of it. I will say that the overcompensating, not just from DC fans, but from people in the industry who are desperate for a positive headline for movies. It's been a minute since we've had a blockbuster movie. The last one was Thor: Love and Thunder, itself a bit of a disappointment considering how other Marvel movies have performed. And that was the beginning of July. That means summer produced no other hits. And we haven't had a Halloween hit either. We're going to talk about Halloween Ends. What a disaster. But I see a lot of overcompensating in the social media space from people in the industry, from people associated with the film, and I think it's off-putting because I think it just creates, more of a fight. I saw someone compare Black Adam to The Godfather. That's ridiculous. You just feel like, I think that DC really needs to distance itself from seeming like a cult. And I think that comments like that don't help. And I'm sure the comment section on this video, it's going to be a real treat. But I'm being very fair and honest here in my breakdown, and so let's get to it. Now, in my opinion, bottom line, Black Adam's debut is not great, but Dwayne Johnson will be able to continue to trumpet that he's the people's champ and fans first, which he's been doing aggressively all weekend long. No one, you can definitely say that. We can all agree that nobody has ever worked harder to promote a movie, even of all the movies he's ever promoted, than Dwayne Johnson has done with Black Adam. Talk about some heavy lifting. And Dwayne Johnson did clear the lower projection of $60 million, which was lowered after Black Adam's really horrible Rotten Tomatoes score dropped earlier in the week. Hollywood lowered the projection from 70 to 60. And that Rotten Tomatoes score, as I predicted, ended up it's like barely 40%, but in the 40s, but it ended up just where I said that it would. And Black Adam came in ahead of Shazam, a similarly obscure related character and a movie that he also produced. So he improved on that. That's good. And he managed to deliver a career best opening for a film where he stars. So that's all great for Dwayne Johnson. I think that, also here's the big question. Where's that extra $7 million come from? Is it thanks to Dwayne Johnson or Henry Cavill? Is it a mix? Do they split that? It's hard to tell. And I think it takes a little bit of the wind out of that as well, because I think with both of them, you would have anticipated a bigger opening. And to be clear, I want to be super clear about this. I believe there is genuinely a solid group of people who really enjoyed Black Adam, who loved it. I know many of you really had a good time, and that's wonderful. And I know you're excited about what could be next for the DCEU on this path. But are there enough of you? That's what Warner Brothers Discovery has to decide, especially on whether or not they want to continue with Dwayne Johnson's vision of where the DCEU should go next. I would say, no, there aren't enough of you. And this has been a problem with DC for a while. They have very vocal fans, but it's a fractured fan base, and no fraction of that overall fan base is big enough to deliver the kind of numbers that they need for the amount of money that needs to be put into superhero content. So anyway, Black Adam could have a spectacular second weekend hold, which would turn this all around. But how spectacular does it need to be? It would need to be under 50%. It would need to be like Aquaman. We're going to talk about Aquaman, but just because of what we're talking about at the moment, Aquaman's second weekend drop was 23%. I don't see that happening for Black Adam. It could. We'll see in a week. But that's what we're talking about here. If it drops like a normal blockbuster, it's going to be a problem. So here's what we're working with right now based on the opening weekend alone. Black Adam had a bigger Thursday night than Fast and Furious 6. It just managed to edge that out. Yet by the end of the weekend, it came in $30 million lower than Fast and Furious 6. So it was very front-loaded. And also, he's not that far off from Hobbs and Shaw. It is a career best, but he didn't blow Hobbs and Shaw out of the water, domestic or worldwide, with Hobbs and Shaw even opening in fewer overseas markets, 63 versus 76. And I gotta tell you, Universal never made a Hobbs and Shaw 2. Probably because its domestic box office couldn't crack 200 million. It was very, very, overload. It was as we discussed just last week on Movie Math, it had the majority of its box office from overseas, which is fine, but that domestic number should have been much higher. And yes, Warner Brothers is making a Shazam 2, which will come out someday. And that movie debuted with over 10 million less than Black Adam. And it didn't have that great box office overall. But it's a much cheaper film, as I suspect the sequel is as well. It cost half of what it did to make Black Adam. Black Adam's $200 million budget is up there with The Batman, and some would even say slightly higher. Yet The Batman opened with double the debut. And again, Warner Brothers isn't even that excited about making The Batman 2. Sure, they're working on it, but they haven't even bothered to date it yet. It'll come out someday. Matt Reeves has lots of ideas that he's gestating. But where's the Batman 2? Think of all the movies that they date too far in advance. Why haven't they done that with the Batman 2? And while this is certainly an improvement on the last few DCEU openings, the Batman isn't a part of the DCEU. Those movies, though, to be fair, came out during the pandemic with a day-and-date release on HBO Max. So when you compare Black Adam beyond that to the movies that were pure theatrical releases from the DCEU, this is still a drop. It's still dropping. Those movies used to open in the 100 million range, over 100 million, as non-pandemic Marvel movies have been consistently doing for the past few years now. And even when Marvel had to contend with the pandemic and some of their own problems, the beleaguered Black Widow and Eternals still opened bigger than Black Adam, as did an even more obscure character, Shang-Chi, in a much less, in Labor Day weekend, which was a new space for opening a blockbuster even. Now, to be fair, Aquaman also opened at 67. These movies are on par. And that managed to get to $1 billion, which everybody always forgets for some reason. But it got to $1 billion. I loved Aquaman. That came out during the Christmas season, as you might recall. And as I just said to you, it had an incredible second weekend hold of just 23% drop. That's amazing. In fact, it didn't have a drop as high as 50%. It was like in the 30s and 40% every weekend until its 10th week of release. Wow! Aquaman also did huge business overseas, as Dwayne Johnson is known to do. But interestingly, as you might recall, Aquaman, remember this? It opened 2 weeks early overseas. We were all like, why is it coming out so early overseas? No, the spoilers! And by the time it hit North America, it was already at 332 overseas, including a whopping 209 million from China, where it ultimately did 291.8. Black Adam doesn't currently have a Chinese release date, and that's where Fast and Furious movies have done incredibly well, including Hobbs and Shaw, and Dwayne Johnson has a very good track record in China as well. But I think that despite them having a very brief stop in China during the movie, which, make no mistake, is to try and get that Chinese release date, I think all the political discussion in the movie probably is going to hurt their chances of a Chinese release date, because I don't think the Chinese government is going to appreciate those conversations. And they, of course, really are the ones who control what movies can enter their country and which cannot. Also, Dwayne Johnson's Black Adam diversity demos were quite different than most blockbusters. 29% Black, 26% Hispanic, 25% Caucasian, 13% Asian. Now, it's commendable to have such outreach to the Black and Hispanic communities. So in the overall U.S. demo, Caucasians are about 60%, according to the last U.S. Census. And that's the top demo. But and some of you have this argument with me when we talk about other movies. That should not be exactly reflected in movie demographics. What you want to show that you have a movie that has broad appeal, your Caucasian number should be on top, but somewhere in the 40s. You want something with a 4 in front of it to show that you do have range, because audiences of color have a tremendous amount of purchase power in the domestic box office. Very, very strong, which is why you see Hollywood reaching out to those communities more and more. Now, Black Panther, which had an astounding opening weekend, far bigger than Black Adam, and that did have universal appeal. You'll wait till we get to the male and female split. But that did have Black audiences at number 1 with 37%, but Caucasian audiences right behind that at 35%. 10% more than Black Adam. Then there was 18% Hispanic, as you can see, 5% Asian. Aquaman, which also had a diverse cast, including a diverse lead, And again, opened on par with Black Adam, was 40% Caucasian, 23% Hispanic, 19% Black, 12% Asian. That's a very good demographic divide for Hollywood's perspective. Black Adam has also really struggled to appeal to women with an audience that's 65% male, whereas Black Panther was a 50-50 split. That's unusual. Usually maybe it would have been like 55-45 for blockbusters. Blockbusters tend to go a little bit more male, but not by much these days. Women also really come out to theaters. Aquaman was like 62% male, so it's kind of close again, but when exit polled, women loved Aquaman the most, interestingly enough. And maybe that helped with Aquaman's incredible holds week to week with word of mouth. And Aquaman also had better critic and cinema scores, although the Rotten Tomatoes audience score is much higher for Black Adam, although I do feel there's some kind of manipulation going on with the Rotten Tomatoes audience scores, sometimes for better and sometimes for worse. But again, as I've said, the Rotten Tomatoes audience score is indicative on these big movies of how motivated fandom is to help or hurt a movie. That's how I would gauge the Black Adam score. And so there is a contingent of DC fans that are really pushing this movie. So just as Black Adam is more of a Dwayne Johnson movie than a DC movie, this opening is better for Dwayne Johnson than for the DC franchise for Warner Brothers Discovery. Now, there is a slim chance it could be another Aquaman, and we will find out in a week what that second weekend drop is. And then we'll really have a very good idea of what's going on. But I think we're pretty sure. I don't see a 23% drop in its future. I just don't. Especially also because Aquaman benefited from the holidays when people wanted to go to the theater. Coming up is Halloween weekend, which is actually not a big movie-going weekend, but as you'll see when we go over what's coming out this week, Black Adam doesn't really have any competition either. It's got 2 weeks till Black Panther 2, 2 weekends to go. So well, we'll see how it does. We'll see how it does. But I do feel that DC's audience continues to be heavily fractured, i.e. not all on the same page, and their projects continue to suffer for that. Not just with muted debuts because it has smaller, little tiny audiences that come out, but also all the fighting. All the fighting. That's gotta stop. It's gotta stop. It makes it very hard to be in the space. It's just really difficult. And so I think that is a big problem for DC. As for the rest of the top 10, fascinatingly, George Clooney and Julia Roberts' Ticket to Paradise opened almost exactly the same as their last collaboration way back in 2016. Wow, no growth of audience whatsoever. Hollywood, though, desperate for any good news on the movie front, is just happy that Ticket to Paradise bested the 12 million projection they lowballed it with, and they're calling it counter-programming to Black Adam. Is it counter-programming if very few people go? Anyway, Universal would love to see this have some legs, and again, there's not much coming out for the next 2 weeks until Black Panther 2 hits. But I think more likely this will explode on digital very shortly. I think it'll drop significantly next week. Universal will rush it out to streaming, to digital purchase or very high price point to rent as they usually do. They just did that with Bros. And then I think Ticket to Paradise will be a hot ticket. When do you plan to watch that movie, if ever? That to me, I don't even know about during the holidays. That to me seems like something you'd want to watch around New Year's. Also, White Lotus is about to start, taking over Sundays from House of the Dragon. And that seems like the exact same thing. Only White Lotus, I think, is a hotter ticket. All right, Hollywood, though, is not going to get good news from the Halloween franchise. As I just said, they're desperate for some good news on the movie front, and it's not here. Where talk about a contentious debate. Although most fans seem to agree that this movie was a stinker, while a few people like myself were like, I kind of liked it. Anyway, it's the latest entry, and it fell a whopping 80% in its second weekend. Hoo boy, that's one of the worst. It's like, that's so bad, that's unusually bad. Now, the last entry, which also debuted day and date on Peacock, Halloween Kills, fell 70%. But that was already at 73 million by the end of its 2 weeks, whereas Halloween Ends is only at 54.1. Thankfully, these movies are cheap to make, but these are career-ending numbers, or at least career take-a-break numbers. Whew! They really, they took a risk with the creative choices they made on this film. And, sometimes creative risks don't work out. I hope they're at least proud of what they did. Maybe someone at Universal or Jason Blum, maybe some producer or executive really respects the creative risks that were taken and will rescue the talent involved. They'll be like, I backed you on it, so it's all our faults. So hopefully that's the case. Because again, as I said, I liked it. And again, Halloween Ends also had serious competition for horror fans this year. Smile continues to post incredible holds, although I thought it was funny last week on Movie Math, I was talking about how well the movie was doing, and a number of you said, yeah, I went to see it, and I didn't like it. So I think it's funny. Have you been tricked into seeing Smile? But people keep going. Well, as many of you have been eager for me to point out, there is also Terrifier 2. Yes, what the heck is this thing? It's been in the top 10 for the last 3 weeks since it debuted, but it's climbing, now at number 7 with 5.2 million. Well, it's a low-budget indie horror film made for just $250,000. Wow! With almost no advertising. So that's impressive, and I think, both those movies are taking away from Halloween Ends as well. The Woman King, it looks like, is almost out of steam at the box office. But that's okay. Sony should be putting it on digital soon for the holidays. And again, just in time for awards voting. Now, awards voters get all these movies as screeners, so it doesn't have to be on digital for that, for them to see it. But I think maybe it'll boost the conversation again, and it'll help put it in front of people again. So I think that will benefit it with awards voting. Hopefully, as you know, I love that movie. And another awards contender, Triangle of Sadness, expanded to 280 theaters and managed to pop into the not very competitive top 10. Look at the bottom of the top 10. Ouch. Ouch! You shouldn't be able to gross less than $1 million and make the top 10. But I think this is the new Hollywood. And Banshees of Inisherin, which has awards chatter for Colin Farrell. Hooray! I hope he gets it. It couldn't happen to a nicer, harder working guy. That debuted in 4 theaters, and it has a very strong per theater average, right up there with Everything Everywhere All at Once, which is one of the strongest per theater averages we've had in a while. Over on Nielsen for late September, Dahmer arrives on the Nielsen charts and dominates. Look at that, 3 times the runner-up, Cobra Kai, which is still going strong 3 weeks into its season 5. But of course, that's all the Cobra Kai episodes there. But look at Dahmer. Look at that. What an explosion of viewership. Wow, that's the kind of show streaming executives dream of. Sorry, Sandman, speaking of dreaming. Also, House of the Dragon, even without its full viewership numbers, because remember, a large chunk of people watch this on HBO, not HBO Max, it managed to overtake Rings of Power on the overall chart. But, looking just at the originals chart, shockingly, She-Hulk with episode 6 fell out of the top 10 entirely. It's not even in forget the overall chart, it's not even in the originals chart. And it might have been pushed out by Friendly Fire as Andor debuted this week at number 6, kind of like where Obi-Wan found itself. But not enough minutes, despite dropping 3 episodes at the debut, to make the overall chart. Andor isn't on the overall chart itself. As for movies, another Sony movie made its way to Netflix thanks to their Pay One window deal. That means Sony releases movies in theaters, then on digital, like wherever movies are sold digitally, like iTunes, Vudu, etc. Then it goes to Netflix, because Sony doesn't have a streaming service. But look, Father Stew, the most watched movie of the week on all services. Then right behind that, Netflix was able to follow up with a number of their own originals to dominate this chart, and a couple of animated movies from some other studios. And then you have a sprinkling of Disney Plus, with 2 entries from Disney Plus Day that are still doing okay. And look at Encanto. What a juggernaut! Talk about a juggernaut. That's another one. And on Netflix, for just last week, for movies, Mila Kunis is still number 1. That's awesome. Rare return for her. She doesn't work that much these days. While family Halloween flick The Curse of Bridge Hollow debuted at number 2. I watched that last night, and I thought it was really fun. I thought it was great. It was certainly, that and Hocus Pocus, 2 very similar movies. I wouldn't watch them the same weekend, but I thought, Curse of Bridge Hollow was great. And they really seriously teased a sequel and maybe a Christmas movie, and I was like, I would watch that, totally. And then also right behind that is the debut of clear John Wick ripoff, Blackout. I can't believe they made that poster. It's such a clear ripoff of John Wick. They should be embarrassed, quite frankly. Josh Duhamel should have been like, don't put my face on that. That's a ripoff. Then with series, Ryan Murphy, who's had a bit of a rough patch lately. Some of us have been wondering if he lost his touch. Well, he has not, as he has number 1 and number 2, thanks to new series The Watcher, which I'm watching. Is pretty darn good. And then also Dahmer, still going more than quite, incredibly strong. And look, there's Mike Flanagan. He can feel a little better as he's now in 3rd spot after debuting in 4th place last week. But, still, wow, Ryan Murphy, that's incredible. He and Shonda Rhimes, they are the king and queen of Netflix. Over on iTunes, it's the usual suspects, not too much new stuff going on here, although it is worth noting that Bros is holding steady in its second week on digital at the top of the top 10. So it seems that audiences were right when they pegged this as a digital movie, not one for theaters. As for this coming week, as I said, it's Halloween weekend, where people tend to party and go trick-or-treating and stuff rather than go to the movies, which is why Halloween content comes out weeks in advance. Still, Lionsgate has one last-minute entry for theaters with Pray for the Devil, while Till finally goes wide its third week of release. That's an awards contender. And another awards contender, Armageddon Time, opens in limited release. So as I said, not too much competition for Black Adam, so we'll see how it does next weekend. And I guess Ticket to Paradise too. All right, as for streaming movies coming out this week, Netflix has 3 awards contenders hitting the service: The Good Nurse, All Quiet on the Western Front, and Wendell and Wild. As for shows, House of the Dragon season finale is tonight. Did you ruin it for yourself with the leak? Anyway, I've been staying away from anything about it. I want to experience it live with you tonight at the watch along, so join me at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And as I said, The White Lotus, Italy, don't call it season 2 because it doesn't compete in the drama category for awards. But The White Lotus, not season 2, takes over Sunday nights starting next week. HBO, they don't let up, they own Sundays. Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities starts Tuesday with 2 episodes daily through the rest of the week for Halloween, also for Halloween. While the mysterious Benedict Society, believe it or not, returns for season 2 itself on Disney Plus this Wednesday. Speaking of Disney Plus, one has to wonder if Andor, really another fantastic episode this past week, if Andor might start to get more attention now that House of the Dragon and Rings of Power will both be wrapped up, and She-Hulk as well. Andor, in addition to its slow pace and lack of Easter eggs, might have also really suffered from a poor release date. I think Disney tried to compete with all those other shows, and I think if Andor had been a little bit better constructed from a business perspective, it could have, but it's very good creatively. So we'll see if maybe it gets its due now that things have calmed down a little bit, in the calm before the Black Panther 2 storm. Time to shine, Andor. If you're going to shine, it's now. And that's this week's Movie Math. What have you been watching? What do you plan to watch? And what are your thoughts on Black Adam's box office and what it means for Dwayne Johnson and also for DC? Share those thoughts down below, subscribe today, and of course, as always, you can check out some more videos right now.